From nonsensical side plots to Master Chief hooking up with an alien or a tail yourself. After all, this was one of the biggest points of contention during the first season, and honestly, the way they tackled it didn't work at all. I mean, Halo's already got such a deep lore with incredible characters and stories. You've got the games and all the novels. So it was kind of mind-boggling when the showrunners introduced entirely new concepts. Mackie, for instance, was a bizarre character. Not only was she a spy for the Covenant, which doesn't make sense in and of itself, but she also slept with Master Chief. Like, what's even happening here? Okay, to be fair, it was pretty funny to see everyone's reactions after that scene. Still, there's just way too much unnecessary noise in Season 1. Mackie, the Desert Witches, and even Quan Ha. These characters don't seem important to the story at all, and yet they continue to derail the main plot as well. So for Season 2, the show needs to return to its roots and tell a more traditional Halo story.
I'll fly with you.
No. Go with the others.
That's not procedure.
Go with the others. That's an order.
Roger that.
Besides, with the success of The Last of Us, everyone's seen just how great sticking with the source material can be, right? But of course, lore alone can't carry a show. So this next thing's also super important, especially for a franchise like Halo. Yep, I'm talking about the soundtrack. Now, this was also a massive downside of Season 1. I mean, when you've got one of, if not the most iconic main themes in video game history, why would you use some generic sci-fi music for your intro? It just doesn't make sense. Plus, the rest of the show doesn't really have much in the way of an authentic soundtrack either. So now that they're heading to the Halo ring in Season 2, I hope they start introducing more music from the games. Like, they're literally sitting on a gold mine here. Not to mention, there's the nostalgia factor for fans as well. Seriously, just look at any successful adaptation. You'll find that they're all pretty faithful to their original soundtracks. Besides, if we don't get the Warthog run at some point during Season 2, then, well, it's game over, isn't it?
That's it?
But hey, speaking of deal breakers, there was one that ruined a big chunk of Season 1 for the majority of people. Of course, it's Master Chief's helmet, or the lack thereof actually. I mean, I get it. Making a compelling character who doesn't show his face is hard. Plus, it can be incredibly tricky to convey emotions as well. That said, it's not like people don't know who the Chief is. In fact, I'd argue that much of his charm stems from the stoic nature of his gaze through the visor. Like, you never know what he's thinking, but you also know exactly what he's thinking. Yeah, it's weird, but it works. Not to mention, we've seen other characters like the Mandalorian pull it off too. So to see Chief take off his helmet so often throughout Season 1 just didn't feel right. Hey, don't get me wrong, I'm all for the emo Chief showing his face every once in a while, but come on, that moment has to be earned. Though, with the way that the first season ended, there is a pretty good chance of this happening. I've got my fingers crossed. Besides, more helmet time would also lead to another great thing, more action.
When did you remove your pellet?
After I saw you remove yours.
Okay.
No, I get it now. Whole lives, all we've seen is targets and missions, but now...
Okay, you'd be lying if you said this wasn't the best part of Season 1. Halo as a franchise is at its best during the action sequences, and we got confirmation of this during the fights in the show as well. Seriously, from that Covenant encounter in the middle, it was all very cool, right down to the insane final fight. Not to mention, the showrunners have nailed Chief's movement and the weight of his armor. Every hit connects with an oomph, and there's a heft to the way he moves. In some ways, it even reminds you of some cutscenes in Halo Infinite, which can only be a good thing. So I'm hoping that we get to see more action from the Chief. You know, some Covenant assaults, 1v1 fights with elites, or even some extra chemistry from the Silver Team. Honestly, there's so much potential here that it'd almost be sad if the series didn't take advantage of it. You know what else has potential though? The Halo rings. Yep, this is arguably one of the most exciting aspects of Season 2. I mean, sure, the show had some flashes of brilliance during the first season, but keep in mind, Halo is all about the rings and the battles that take place within them. Like Combat Evolved literally starts with us crashing into one another. So this is genuinely going to be a make or break moment for the series. You know, the way they portray the rings, the Forerunner infrastructure, and all that jazz. Plus, you've got to have my guy 343 Guilty Spark in there too. In fact, you know what? If all they did was copy the first game's story and told it throughout an entire season, that'd be perfectly fine. It would be an authentic representation of the ring, and we'll get to see some of the more iconic moments from the franchise as well.
Do it.
Just a word of warning. There's no telling what kind of frightening and jumbled images might emerge from your past. Remember, not everything you recall is reflective of real events.
Honestly, this sounds like a win-win situation to me. You know what would be an even bigger win though? If Halo stopped trying to mimic other sci-fi shows. Seriously, the number of generic sci-fi tropes that are just shoved in there is insane. From that generic intro to all the side plots, the show doesn't seem to have an identity of its own. And considering we're talking about Halo, one of the most iconic sci-fi franchises out there, that sentence is insane in and of itself. I mean, it's got so many unique things going for it, and yet they largely remain underutilized in the series. So for Season 2, the showrunners need to narrow down their focus on the things that make Halo great. No more sidekick characters that Chief is trying to save, and greater attention to the larger Covenant war. Oh, and at this point, I wouldn't even mind if they started introducing the whole Forerunner and the Precursor backstory right now. After all, that stuff is still better than whatever side plot they had going with Quan Ha. For real though, there's so much source material that they could pull from, which leads us to the final and perhaps the most important thing Season 2 needs to nail: Master Chief's personality. Like, this seems so obvious since he is the main character, and yet it's wild how different he was in the series as compared to the games. Sure, I'm not saying we should strip him of any emotions or anything like that. In fact, Halo games are full of touching emotional moments with Chief, especially with Cortana. It's just that the show perhaps goes too far. The Spartan never gets to establish any real connection with the characters around him, and in some ways, that makes all the intense moments with those people feel super underwhelming. Not to mention, the story also doesn't revolve around him. I mean, there's nothing wrong with switching up the perspective every once in a while, but you've got to remember that in many ways, Halo is Master Chief. So to have him wander around aimlessly and let events unfold around him is just a strange creative choice.
A plague carried in on an unauthorized transport ship. It spread quickly, killing off most of the population. There was no cure.
That's why Season 2 needs to bring back the focus on his story. Honestly, everyone just wants to see Master Chief doing what Master Chief does, and that's about it. Give him more agency, make him more reliable, and most importantly, turn him into the demon that the Covenant actually fears. It really isn't that complicated. Alright, that's everything Halo Season 2 needs to nail to not be a flop. See you in the next video.